Ministry, saying they may have killed ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Our chief investigative correspondent Brian Ross is here with the latest reporting. Brian, good morning.
Well, good morning, David. The claim came this morning in an official statement from the Russian Defense Ministry, saying they may have killed the ISIS leader in an airstrike about 2 weeks ago. This morning, the U.S. military says it cannot confirm the claim, but if true, it would certainly be a major victory against ISIS. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's brutal reign only began 3 years ago, but in that time, as the founder of ISIS, he became the face of evil to the civilized world.
History will regard Baghdadi as a bloodthirsty tyrant. I mean, during his reign, his organization conquered a vast stretch of territory, ruled over something like 5 million people, and he imposed his iron will and executed anyone who stood in his way.
And it was Baghdadi who inspired his followers to stun the world with social media videos that depicted barbarism and atrocity. Among his thousands of victims were 4 young Americans taken hostage in Syria: James Foley, Stephen Sutloff, Peter Kassig, and Kayla Mueller, whose parents say Baghdadi took their daughter as his personal sex slave before she died in captivity.
Look at the symbolism in that. He's raping America.
Baghdadi had been a prime target of U.S. forces, and he has been reported dead many times before, only to reappear. The Russians claim one of their airstrikes last month near the city of Raqqa targeted a meeting of top ISIS leaders and that some 300 of them were killed. The Russians say Baghdadi was at that meeting, and that's why they say they may have killed him. But the statement is far from definitive, and there have been no words of Baghdadi's fate from ISIS social media outlets this morning, David.
Many claims before, too, that Baghdadi's been killed.
A man carrying a knife has been tasered by police outside the Houses of Parliament in London. The man was stopped just meters from where an officer was stabbed to death in a terrorist attack in March. London's Metropolitan Police said they are not currently treating the incident as terrorist-related, but remain open-minded. The man in his 30s is being questioned by officers. A security review of the outside of the parliamentary estate has now been ordered.
Major developments after that devastating high-rise fire in London. Tonight, the first images now coming in from inside that building. ABC's James Longman from London.
The twisted mess of ruined lives, a first look inside the London inferno. Nothing left but charred rubble. And there are still bodies in here, though it's not clear how many. The search still too dangerous. The fear that the number of dead will soar well past the 17 already confirmed.
What floor are you on?
The horrors captured on social media as the flames raged.
We're stuck on the 23rd floor!
Grief has turned to anger here. Look at this wall of condolence and look at some of these messages. Jail those responsible.
This is an accident that never needed to happen.
It seems there's been a bit of a political backlash in response as well.
Yeah, this is becoming very political now. Again, a lot of these questions, for example, are fire safety regulations high enough? Were warnings ignored by local politicians? Today, even Theresa May, the Prime Minister, visited victims, but she's been criticised for failing to do so yesterday, and that's led to accusations of her just not caring or not engaging with this community. Queen Elizabeth, though, and Prince William did just that today, visiting a West London site and meeting volunteers, survivors and rescue workers. And the Queen has expressed her deepest sympathies to all the families of the victims. Engineers, though, have been stunned at how quickly this fire spread, engulfing the building in less than an hour. And it's the use of cheap aluminum cladding filled with inflammable insulation which is a major focus. And that same cladding is found on thousands of other buildings, both in the UK, around the world. It's been blamed for other fires in Dubai, in Australia. So that's a real question, as well as the one who were warning signals ignored. But this death toll heading up towards triple figures.
The Chinese authorities have confirmed that an explosion in front of a kindergarten in the eastern part of the country was caused by a makeshift bomb, and that the suspect was killed by the blast. Police identified the suspect as a 22-year-old man surnamed Xu, who suffered from a mental disorder. Components used in making explosive devices were found at the suspect's home, and words related to death were written on the wall, but no special motive is evident as of yet. The explosion occurred at around 4:50 p.m. local time, killing a total of 8 people and injuring 65 others. Most of the dead were parents waiting to pick up their children.
Uncollected dead bodies have been spotted in Marawi City in the Philippines. Provincial Crisis Committee spokesman Zia Alonto Adyong told reporters on June 15th that, quote, dead bodies, at least 100, are scattered around the encounter area. Adyong is referring to where Philippine security forces have been clashing with ISIS-linked Maute militants in Marawi City for the last 3 weeks. The latest military estimates are that 206 militants have been killed since the conflict began, along with 58 soldiers and 26 civilians. Adyong also said about 500 to 1,000 people are still trapped in the city and that they are running out of food and water. The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council said the Marawi conflict has displaced more than 66,700 families. The organization is considering setting up tent cities for those who have made it out of Marawi.
The Philippines military believes that some Islamic State militants managed to slip away from besieged Marawi City. According to Brigadier General Restituto Padilla, militants that stormed the city last month may have mingled with evacuees during the last 4 weeks. In response, the military has tightened security around the neighboring cities of Iligan and Cagayan de Oro.
Officially, the Pentagon is saying no final decision has been made yet, but for months we've been reporting that 3,000 to 5,000 additional American troops are expected to deploy to Afghanistan. This comes as President Trump gave Secretary Mattis the authority to decide how many more troops are going over. In congressional testimony, Mattis blamed the last administration for cutting troops too early, leading to the setback.
When we reduced our forces there, I believe in what was probably in hindsight a misguided application of our forces. We restricted them from using our air support with some idea that we would wean them off the need of it. That meant in the mountain country, these troops were often fighting at a disadvantage.
Before leaving office, President Obama ordered 1,500 U.S. troops home, so this increase of American forces partially makes up for that, Kelly.
Donald Trump is about to overturn another of Barack Obama's big initiatives, the thaw in relations with Cuba. According to White House sources, Trump will link the rapprochement to democratic advances on the island, including the holding of free elections and the release of political prisoners. Although there will be no abrupt disruption of trade, Trump is expected to take measures that will affect tourism, which is experiencing a real boom. Nearly 300,000 Americans visited Cuba in the first 5 months of this year. There'll also be a ban on all transactions with the Cuban military and intelligence services, bearing in mind that the armed forces control a powerful business holding that dominates the tourism sector. However, it seems the airlines and cruise ships that regularly visit Cuba will not be affected. But not all the developments made under Obama will be reversed. The U.S. Embassy, for instance, will remain open in the capital, Havana.
Former President Barack Obama could once again be president, only this time it would be as president of Harvard University. The Boston Globe has thrown his name into the ring as a possible successor to replace current Harvard president Drew Faust. And while the paper said it's possible the university decides to give the job to someone already at the school, they could look at alums as well. Obama entered Harvard Law School in 1988 and was the first African-American editor of the school's law review. The Globe wrote, "It's not the leader of the free world, but heading one of the world's premier universities could hold lots of appeal." And maybe he would have time in between writing his White House memoir.
I think the circumstances, the subject matter, and the person I was interacting with, that combination of things I'd never experienced before, but it led me to believe I got to write it down, and I got to write it down in a very detailed way.
CNN has sued the FBI for the release of the memos former FBI Director James Comey kept of his conversations with President Donald Trump. According to the lawsuit filed Thursday in federal court, CNN submitted a Freedom of Information Act request on May 16th. Though the FBI agreed to provide the memos, it denied the outlet's request for expedited processing. The network appealed to the Department of Justice for a faster response to the request. The Department of Justice granted CNN's request on June 2nd.
So my thinking was, if I write it in such a way that I don't include anything that would trigger a classification, that'll make it easier for us to discuss within the FBI and the government, and to hold on to it in a way that makes it accessible to us.
CNN argues that because Comey detailed the memos and said they weren't classified, there's no reason the FBI shouldn't hand them over. But as of June 15th, CNN still hasn't received the documents, and the lawsuit states the FBI wouldn't give the network a timetable for the release. It's unclear why the FBI hasn't handed over the documents, but we do know the special counsel investigating the Russian attempt to influence the election has them.
Do you have a copy of any of those notes personally?
I don't. I turned them over to Bob Mueller's investigators.
North Korea's ill treatment of a detained American, while it continues to draw greater attention to the regime's human rights abuses.
Doctors treating the American student who was detained in North Korea for 17 months and was released a few days ago in coma said he suffered severe brain damage. At a press conference on Thursday, images of Otto Warmbier's brain were released. They showed significant loss of brain tissue in all areas of his brain.
We have no certain or verifiable knowledge of the cause or circumstances of his neurological injury. This pattern of brain injury, however, is usually seen as a result of cardiopulmonary arrest, where the blood supply to the brain is inadequate for a period of time, resulting in the death of brain tissue.
Doctors described Warmbier's current status as a state of unresponsive wakefulness. He spontaneously opens and blinks his eyes but doesn't seem to understand language, respond to verbal commands, or be aware of his surroundings. Doctors also said Warmbier doesn't seem to have suffered from physical abuse or bone fractures, with his skull and neck bones being normal. While Pyongyang has claimed that Warmbier fell into coma by taking an overdose of sleeping pills after contracting botulism, doctors said
those tests did not reveal any evidence of active or chronic denervation, nor any repetitive stimulation that would suggest active botulism at this time.
Meanwhile, the background process of how Warmbier got to be released brings attention to the possibility of dialogue between Washington and Pyongyang on the North Korean nuclear issue. The U.S. State Department Special Representative Joseph Yun stood at the forefront of the diplomatic process, meeting with the North Korean UN mission ambassador early this month and then visiting Pyongyang. As he is known to be in charge of nuclear issues, though the aim of his visit was for securing the release of American detainees in North Korea, there are speculations that the U.S. and North Korea could have met to test the waters for further discussions.
That congressional baseball game in Washington. Democrats and Republicans hoping to set an example tonight as we now learn new details about the congressman in critical condition. Here's ABC's Mary Bruce.
Lawmakers turned ball players. It's going to be a big night. Arriving ready for the big game.
Steve Scalise, this hat's for you.
Many in LSU hats, a tribute to the player not on the field. Second baseman, Louisiana Congressman Steve Scalise. Tonight, hospitalized in critical condition, shot down when a barrage of gunfire tore through the Republicans' final practice. Overnight, the president visiting him at the hospital, telling reporters today Scalise is in tough shape.
He's in some trouble, but he's a great fighter and he's going to be okay, we hope.
This morning, a third surgery for the congressman. The bullet that hit his hip injured his internal organs, fracturing bones and causing severe bleeding. Tonight, his team taking to the field and a surprise on the pitcher's mound. Capitol Police Agent David Bailey wounded protecting so many in yesterday's shooting, throwing out the first pitch. And the two teams kneeling at second base in honor of Scalise, reminding us of their unity and friendly competition.
We want to beat those guys and they want to beat us, and afterwards we're going to give each other a hug and drink beer together.
BuzzFeed News reported on Thursday that the Trump administration's Department of Commerce has removed LGBTQ language from its annual statement on equal employment. The erasure comes during Pride Month, which celebrates and honors the LGBTQ community. When the statement was released last year during the Obama administration, it read that the department wouldn't tolerate discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, age, genetic information, or disability, physical or mental. Once BuzzFeed reporter David Mack pointed out the missing language, the department has since added the language back in.
The Associated Press has reported that in a move hailed by LGBT rights groups, Oregon became the first state in the U.S. on Thursday to allow residents to mark their gender as not specified on applications for driver's licenses, learner's permits, and identity cards. Under the new rule approved by the Oregon Transportation Commission, Oregonians who selected the new option will have an X appear instead of M or F on those cards. The rule, which takes effect on July 1st, is a first for the U.S. David House, spokesman for Oregon's Driver and Motor Vehicles Division, or DMV, told the Associated Press that the new rule came about after a Multnomah County judge in June 2016 allowed Jamie Shoup, a Portland resident, to legally change to non-binary gender.
Can Black Lives Matter be sued? A federal judge is about to decide. A U.S. district judge is expected to determine, quote, within the coming days if a Louisiana police officer's lawsuit against Black Lives Matter and one of its leaders can proceed. The unnamed officer was injured at a protest outside police headquarters over the death of Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge. Police shot and killed Sterling last summer. The officer filed suit in November against Black Lives Matter and activist DeRay McKesson. The suit claims the officer was hit in the face with a piece of concrete during the protest and claims that knocked out some of his teeth and caused other injuries. His attorney insists Black Lives Matter is an organization that can and should be held liable for his injuries. But the attorney defending McKesson says there's no evidence that Black Lives Matter is more than a community of interests, and he says there's no evidence it has a membership hierarchy, dues, or insurance. While the judge hadn't made a decision as of Friday morning, there is some precedent for this case. A judge dismissed a similar lawsuit earlier this month, citing in part a lack of evidence that Black Lives Matter could be sued.
This week marks 50 years since the Six-Day War in 1967, a war that will permanently change the course of history for the Middle East, for Israelis and for Palestinians. This eastern part of Jerusalem was taken by Israel during the war, and the Palestinians born in the city now carry Israeli IDs. For many of them, 1967 marked the Naksa, a setback. They say they won't accept a Palestinian state without this place at its capital. The problem is, Israel wants the same thing. So, what does this anniversary mean to the people living in the center of it all, here in Jerusalem, or as it's known in Arabic, Al-Quds? We're here in Jaffa Street in West Jerusalem. It's a popular destination for young Israelis. They come here to shop, to see the sights, and to party. It's been 50 years since 1967, since the Six-Day War. What does that mean for you?
What does it mean for me? Well.
It means it's a miracle. In Hebrew, we call it an esgadol. It's a miracle that God has reunified the people, and your Jubilee specifically represents the captives being set free and all God's people coming together, which includes all the Muslims joining Israel.
And so how do you feel about the ongoing peace process between Israelis and Palestinians?
Doomed to failure. It never worked, it can't work, it's impossible to work.
So you don't believe that Palestinians want peace?
I don't believe, I know. It's not possible.
On our way from west to east, we come across this. Behind me you see the Dome of the Rock, and in front of me is Masjid al-Aqsa. There are literally thousands of Palestinians here today to attend Friday prayers, and then they're going to go off back to their homes to do some shopping before iftar, and we're going to follow them along to Salah ad-Din Street and get to hear what some of them have to say. عندك أي أمل في تبعية السلام؟
أي أمل؟ أمل إبليس في الجنة. أمل إبليس في الجنة يصير في عمل السلام. اليهود ما بدها سلام عمل، اليهود بدها أرض فاضية بدون ناس.
ممكن الفلسطينيين واليهود يعيشوا مع بعض هنا في القدس؟
يعني هو بالنهاية هو الحل الوحيد، يعني فيش مجال لا هم يطلعوا ولا إحنا نطلع. بالنهاية يعني يمكن هو الحل الأمثل يعني.
And that's it. We've been all over Jerusalem. We've spoken to Israelis. We've spoken to Palestinians. Everybody says they want some form of peace. But is peace actually possible?
Amazon has dabbled in the grocery business with Amazon Fresh, and now the company is making a huge step forward by acquiring Whole Foods for $13.7 billion. This is one of the biggest acquisitions in history. For perspective, Disney bought Marvel and Lucasfilm for $4 billion each. The recent acquisition has the potential of vastly expanding Amazon Fresh. Whole Foods has brick-and-mortar stores all across the United States, Canada, and the UK.
Some astronomers think our sun most likely had a twin, and they've given that hypothetical twin an interesting name, Nemesis. Scientists have theorized for a while that stars are born in binary systems where companion stars orbit together. Our stellar neighbor Alpha Centauri is a triplet system, and you may be familiar with a famous example from science fiction. Scientists began hypothesizing in the 80s about our sun's possible twin. NASA hasn't been able to find any sign of Nemesis yet, but now they have an idea of where it could have gone. A new study found that young stars like our sun are forming at least 500 astronomical units apart from their companion. That's about 47 billion miles. With this information in mind, scientists ran computer simulations to see how star systems form. An estimated 60% of binary systems broke up to form single star systems, and astronomers are thinking that likely happened to our sun. That means Nemesis most likely broke away from our system, and if that's the case, there's very little chance we'll ever be able to find it. An area of Antarctica larger than Texas partially melted last year, a group of international researchers has found. While it's pretty well known that ice at both poles has been melting for a while now, this ice is a bit different. In this case, it was surface ice the scientists were monitoring, not sea ice. The melting was likely caused by a strong El Niño, something scientists expect will become more common as the climate continues to warm. And combining more frequent air-driven warming from above and ocean-driven melting from below could spell bad news for those living on the coast. The West Antarctic ice sheet has the potential to raise the sea level by over 10 feet if it were to collapse or fracture. This time, the melting didn't do any permanent damage, but the scientists are worried it could be a sign of things to come.
Nem a carne, nem ao sangue. A salvação de João dos. Amém, amém. Quem crê, vamos achar? O Senhor